The sound of metal crunching echoed through every corner of the underground parking garage, like a thunderclap trapped in concrete. Heads turned. Phones dropped. A few employees standing near the elevator froze mid-conversation, watching as a silver Bentley Continental lurched sideways and slammed, hard and without hesitation, into the driver's side of a dusty old sedan parked quietly in the far corner of level 2. The impact left a deep crease along the sedan's door panel. A side mirror snapped clean off. The sedan rocked on its chassis, settled, and was still. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the Bentley's door swung open, and Evelyn Carter stepped out. She was wearing a slate gray blazer over a cream silk blouse, designer heels that clicked like metronome strikes against the polished concrete, and the expression of someone who had not yet decided whether this was a nuisance or a catastrophe, leaning heavily toward nuisance. She pressed her phone against her shoulder, muffling the call she had been in the middle of, and surveyed the damage with the kind of detached calculation she applied to quarterly earnings reports. Her Bentley had a pale scratch along its front fender. She winced. The old sedan, on the other hand, looked as though it had been shoved off a shelf. She barely glanced at it. Evelyn Carter was 41 years old, the founding CEO of Caldwell Meridian Technologies, a firm valued at just over $9 billion, and she had not survived 15 years at the summit of a male-dominated industry by letting small moments rattle her composure. She straightened her blazer, returned the phone to her ear, and resumed the conversation she had been having about the pending acquisition of a defense software company based in Northern Virginia, a deal worth approximately $2.4 billion. The crumpled sedan was, to her, background noise. The building's maintenance supervisor spotted her from across the garage and came jogging over, clipboard in hand. Two junior employees who had been heading to their cars slowed their pace, angling to watch. Then Marcus Webb appeared. He emerged from the stairwell door at the far end of the garage, carrying a gray mop bucket, wearing the faded navy uniform of the building's custodial staff. He was somewhere in his early 60s, broad-shouldered in a way that time had softened but not erased, with close-cropped silver hair and a stillness about him that was difficult to define. He set down the bucket and walked toward the sedan without hurrying. The way a man walks toward something he already knows the answer to. His leather work gloves were worn through at the fingertips. He looked at the damage quietly, and then he looked at Evelyn Carter. She was still on the phone. He waited. She ended the call, dropped the phone into her blazer pocket, and turned to face him as though she had just noticed a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong room. "This yours?" she asked, nodding at the sedan. Marcus said yes. She clicked her tongue. "You park here every day?" He said he did. She looked back at her Bentley, then at the sedan again, and then she said the thing that settled into everyone present, like a stone dropping into still water. "That car should be in a junkyard." She said it flatly, without cruelty in her tone, which somehow made it worse the way a verdict is worse than an argument. A couple of the watching employees exchanged glances. One suppressed a smile. The maintenance supervisor studied his clipboard. Marcus looked at her without expression and without anger, and slowly pulled off one glove, then the other, folding them neatly in his hands. He looked at the crumpled door, the broken mirror lying on the concrete, and the gap where the side panel had buckled inward. And then he said, quietly, almost to himself, "Some things look old. That doesn't mean they aren't dangerous." Evelyn laughed once through her nose, the laugh of someone who has already dismissed a conversation before it ends, and began fishing for her insurance card. It was the junior analyst from the 4th floor who noticed it first. He had wandered a few feet closer to the sedan while everyone else was watching the CEO. And now he stood very still, head tilted, staring at something inside the car's cracked open trunk. The impact from the Bentley had popped the latch. The trunk lid sat ajar at an angle, and through the gap, the analyst could see the edge of something that didn't belong in any civilian vehicle he had ever seen. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Is that a rotating license plate mechanism?" Everyone looked. Marcus moved not quickly, but decisively, and pressed the trunk gently closed with one hand. But not before two more people had leaned in close enough to see what was underneath the weather-worn tarp. A recessed panel mounted flush against the rear interior wall, fitted with toggle switches in a military-grade housing, a small red activation button protected by a hinged cover. And at the corner of the visible space, a mechanical assembly connected to the rear bumper, the unmistakable skeleton of a rotating license plate system, the kind that existed, officially, only in classified vehicle modifications and the imagination of film directors. Evelyn Carter had stopped looking for her insurance card. She was staring at the trunk. Something moved behind her eyes, a calculation. Not fear yet, but the first quiet rearrangement of the facts she had walked in with. The junior analyst was still staring at the gap in the trunk, his face wearing the expression of a man who has opened a door, expecting a closet, and found instead a staircase going down. Around him, the cluster of onlookers had gone quiet in the way. Crowds go quiet when they collectively sense they have stumbled into something that is not meant for them. The garage, which had smelled of exhaust and motor oil 30 seconds ago, now smelled of something older and less definable. The fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead. Someone's phone buzzed with a notification, and the owner silenced it immediately, as though noise itself had become inappropriate. Marcus watched her from across the hood of the sedan. He did not look alarmed. He looked patient, the way a chess player looks when the board has developed exactly as they expected. He pulled his gloves back on. He reached into his jacket pocket, not his uniform jacket, Evelyn noticed now, but something darker underneath, something he had been wearing beneath the custodial layer, and he produced a small key fob unlike any she had seen at a dealership. He pressed a button. The trunk sealed itself with a sound like a bank vault drawing shut. "I'll need the accident report filed through facilities," he said. His voice was neither hard nor soft. It was level. "I assume your insurance will cover the damage." Evelyn said nothing. The junior analyst had gone pale. And the silver Bentley, sitting at its shallow angle with the pale scratch on its fender, suddenly looked like the least interesting vehicle in the garage. The next morning, the unofficial account of what had happened on parking level 2 had moved through Caldwell Meridian's 9 floors, with the speed and enthusiasm that office gossip always achieves when it involves both the CEO and something inexplicable. By 10 o'clock, at least a dozen people claimed to have been there personally. By noon, the descriptions had expanded to include things no one had actually seen. Armored plating. A concealed exhaust port. What one person in accounting swore was a fingerprint scanner on the driver's door. Most of it was embellishment. But not all of it. Evelyn arrived at her corner office on the 9th floor at 7:45, earlier than anyone else, and closed the door. She did not open her calendar. She opened a browser window and began searching for what she had seen in that trunk. The switch housing, the mechanical plate system, the fob. It took her less than 20 minutes to narrow it down to a single reference point. The Aston Martin DB5, produced between 1963 and 1965, and famously modified for use by British intelligence services. The rotating plate assembly, the rear-mounted defense systems, the concealed dashboard controls all of it documented in declassified materials and automotive history archives. What had been installed in the trunk of Marcus Webb's decade-old civilian sedan was not a replica or a cosplay prop. The components she had glimpsed were real, machined metal, professionally integrated into a vehicle that had been deliberately disguised to look like nothing at all. She called her head of HR. She asked for Marcus Webb's full personnel file. It arrived in her email within the hour. She read it twice. Marcus Webb, 62 years old, hired as a facilities maintenance technician 12 years ago. Exemplary performance reviews. Never missed a day. Listed no emergency contact. No dependents. His previous employment history was blank, not sparse, not vague, but completely, structurally blank, as if the 12 years at Caldwell Meridian were the first years he had ever existed in any administrative record. No address before the apartment in Georgetown he currently occupied. No education records. No prior employer. Nothing. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. People didn't simply appear in the world at 50 years old with a clean record and no past. Not people who drove cars with classified level hardware in the trunk. She went down to the garage at 11:30, when she knew the maintenance team took their break. Marcus was there alone, crouched beside a floor drain near the far wall, with a wrench and a small flashlight. She walked toward him, and he stood before she reached him, not startled, just ready. She asked him directly, "What is in that car?" He looked at her calmly. "An old vehicle in need of bodywork," he said. "Thanks to this morning." She said she had done her research. She said she knew what those components were. He held her gaze for 3 seconds exactly, then looked past her shoulder. And she turned to see that the elevator doors had opened, and 2 of her senior staff were crossing the garage toward them. By the time she turned back, Marcus had crouched again and was already working the drain with his wrench, as if the conversation had concluded in a way he had decided unilaterally. She stood over him for a moment, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, the specific, infuriating sensation of not being the most powerful person in the room. That afternoon, she summoned the head of building security and asked for a full background pull on Marcus Webb. She wanted prior addresses, cross-referenced identity records, anything from before his hire date. The report came back the following morning. The investigator, a woman named Danvers, who had done corporate intelligence work for government contractors, called Evelyn directly instead of sending an email. She said, "Miss Carter, I can confirm that the identity of Marcus Webb does not appear in any federal or state database before approximately 13 years ago. The identity appears to have been constructed. It's clean work, very clean. Whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing." She paused. "I've seen this kind of construction before, mostly in connection with federal witness relocation or intelligence program exfiltration." Evelyn asked what that meant in plain language. Danvers said, "It means someone very official wanted this man to disappear. And he's been invisible ever since. By choice." The silence that followed that sentence lasted a long time. Outside Evelyn's office window, the city moved in its ordinary morning rhythm. Taxis, pedestrians, a courier on a bicycle weaving through the intersection below. None of it seemed relevant. None of it seemed connected to the thing she was now in the middle of. That evening, Evelyn made a decision she would later describe as the worst and best of her professional life. She followed him. She waited in her car 2 blocks from the building until she saw the old sedan, its dented door still unrepaired, pull out of the lot at 6:15. She followed at a distance through Georgetown, out onto a 2-lane road that curved away from the main commercial grid, and finally into an industrial neighborhood near the waterfront, where a row of former warehouse units had been converted into storage and private garage space. Marcus pulled into Unit 11, and the roll-up door came down behind him. Evelyn parked on the street and sat still for 5 minutes. Then she walked to the side of the building where a narrow window sat near ground level, partially frosted but not entirely. She crouched and looked through the clear corner. What she saw inside Unit 11 would stay with her for the rest of her life. The sedan was parked in the center with its doors open and its hood raised. Surrounding it on 3 metal shelving units were components and devices she could only partially identify. Communication equipment and housings she associated with military surplus, optical surveillance tools, a disassembled transmitter array, and at the rear of the space, a corkboard covered in photographs. Photographs of men in suits at formal events, men in military dress, a photograph taken from distance telephoto, clearly of a man entering a building she recognized as a federal office complex in Washington. There were strings connecting some of the photographs, not the theatrical strings of a conspiracy wall, but precise, minimal connections, like a diagram built by someone who already knew all the answers and was simply keeping the map visible for reference. On a smaller table to the left sat a shadow box under glass. Inside it were 3 service medals, and above the shadow box, pinned directly to the concrete wall with a single spike, was a photograph of a younger Marcus, 30 years younger, perhaps lean and intense in a field jacket, standing between 2 other men in front of a vehicle she now recognized immediately. An Aston Martin DB5, silver gray. Unmarked, she walked back to her car slowly, She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, without starting the engine. She had come here looking for leverage, for something to use, to control the narrative of what had happened in her garage, and why an old janitor was driving something that belonged in a classified motor pool. What she had found instead was something that rearranged the architecture of the situation entirely. Marcus Webb had not stumbled into her building. He had built a life of deliberate invisibility, and she had walked into it at 45 miles per hour and cracked it open. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Raymond Cole, her chief operating officer, and the person she trusted most in the company. She answered. He said, "Evelyn, I need you to come in early tomorrow. Something's happened with the server access logs." She asked what kind of something. He said, "The kind we don't discuss on the phone." She arrived the next morning to find that the building's security camera system on parking level 2 had been accessed remotely the previous night. 12 hours of footage had been scrubbed, not corrupted, not glitched, but professionally erased, with the deletion routed through a proxy chain that the company's IT security lead described as nation-state-level obfuscation. The footage that had been deleted covered the period from the accident through the following morning. Specifically, it covered every moment in which the trunk of Marcus Webb's sedan had been visible to a camera. Furthermore, a junior member of the IT infrastructure team named Daniel Park had not reported for work that morning, was not responding to his phone, and his access badge had been used at 3:17 in the morning to enter the server room on sublevel 1, after which it had not been used again. Evelyn stood in the middle of the IT operations center, surrounded by monitors and the low hum of server racks, and understood that the accident in her garage had not been an accident at all. She thought about the impact, the way the Bentley had swung into the sedan, the angle of it, the timing. She thought about the call she had been on, the negotiation that had pushed her into that particular mood, that particular level of distraction. She thought about how easy it was to manipulate someone who was already moving fast, already thinking 3 steps ahead, already certain that their own momentum was the only force in the room. She thought about how long someone patient could wait for exactly that combination of factors to converge. She found Marcus in the east stairwell at 8:40, mopping the landing between floors 3 and 4 with the same methodical, unhurried rhythm he brought to everything. She closed the stairwell door behind her and told him what she knew. The cameras, the IT employee, the erased footage. She told him she thought someone had hacked her vehicle's navigation system and caused the collision deliberately. She told him she didn't know if the target had been her, or him, or the car. He set the mop handle against the wall. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she had known him, which was only 4 days, though it felt much longer, the custodial performance dropped away entirely. Not dramatically, not with a reveal or a declaration. Simply dropped, the way a coat drops from someone's shoulders when they finally come inside from the cold. What was underneath was not theatrical. It was just precise. His posture changed. His eyes changed. He said, "Tell me everything you noticed about the car's behavior before the impact. Every detail. Start from when you turned into the garage level," she told him. He listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he was quiet for 20 seconds. Then he said, "The steering assist override. They accessed it through the building's own network. They needed someone inside to open the access port. Your IT employee didn't disappear. He was extracted." She stared at him. He looked back at her with the flat steadiness of someone delivering a weather report. The collision was engineered to get access to the car, not to kill you. They needed the trunk compromised and the vehicle temporarily unattended in a location where a secondary team could assess the contents. The camera deletion was the second phase. He reached into the pocket of his uniform jacket. He produced a small device the size of a matchbox, matte black, with no markings. He turned it over once in his hand. "I found this on the undercarriage of your car last night," he said. "It's a relay transmitter. Fairly old design, but modified. The modification is specific to one organization." He set it on the handrail between them. She looked at it. He said, I thought I'd left these people behind a long time ago. The name he gave her that afternoon, standing in her ninth-floor office with the door locked and the blinds drawn, was the Meridian Group, not her company, not Caldwell Meridian Technologies, but an older thing with the same word at its center, which Marcus said was not a coincidence. The Meridian Group had been an off-ledger intelligence contractor operating under a series of shell structures since the late 1980s. They had worked alongside legitimate agencies on covert operations in multiple theaters and had, at some point in the late 1990s, crossed a line from contractor to principal, meaning they had stopped taking orders and started giving them. Marcus had been embedded with an agency task force that spent 3 years building a legal framework to dismantle the organization. The operation had succeeded, partially. The network had fractured, but the data, the full accounting of their operations, their assets, their names, had never been made public, because the data was dangerous enough to implicate people who were still, currently, in positions of power. "Where is the data?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew. He looked at her steadily. "In the car," she said. He nodded once. She sat down behind her desk and folded her hands. "And you've been here, in this building, for 12 years, she said. "Not a question." He said, "The building's network infrastructure is connected to a federal routing node, 3 blocks east. That node provides a specific kind of signal coverage I needed to keep certain systems active. Maintenance of the archive requires a live handshake every 72 hours. She looked at him. "You chose to work here specifically." "In this building," he said, "I chose where I could do the least harm and the most good." Simultaneously, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "And I hit your car." Something passed across his face, not quite a smile, but the neighborhood of one. "You hit my car," he confirmed. Raymond Cole had worked beside Evelyn Carter for 7 years. He had been with her through the series of funding crisis, through the federal contracting negotiations, through the hostile takeover attempt in year 4 that they had beaten back together over 3 sleepless weeks. She trusted him with everything. She trusted him, she realized now, because she had never had a reason not to, and that, Marcus had told her the night before over cold coffee in his warehouse unit, was exactly the kind of trust a sophisticated actor worked very hard to build. It took her less than 4 hours to find the confirmation. Raymond Cole's personal finances, accessed through a data broker contact, Evelyn kept for due diligence purposes, showed a pattern of transfers she would not have identified as suspicious a week ago. A company in Liechtenstein, a fund domiciled in the Cayman Islands that listed no public beneficiaries, a consulting arrangement with a security firm that did not appear in any public registry. She pulled the name of the security firm and ran it through 3 databases. On the 4th, it surfaced listed as a former vendor of a defunct intelligence contractor that had been publicly dissolved in 2003. The Meridian Group had never fully dissolved. It had just gone quieter. And Raymond Cole had been talking to what remained of it for at least 4 years. She sat with that knowledge for exactly 2 minutes, which was the amount of time she allowed herself before she picked up the phone and called Marcus. Not Cole. Not the board. Not her lawyer. She called the janitor, who was not a janitor, because he was the only person in her life right now whose loyalties she could verify through a method more reliable than trust. The method was simple. He had had 12 years to use the data in that car for personal gain, and he had mopped floors instead. She called Marcus from the parking garage level 1, the executive level, where she knew the camera coverage had gaps. She told him what she'd found. He said, "How long before Cole suspects you know?" She said probably less than 24 hours, based on a meeting he had requested for the following morning that she now understood was not about quarterly projections. Marcus said, "Then we have tonight." She asked what tonight meant. He said, "It means you and I are going to retrieve something from my garage before they send a team to do it first." She looked at the old sedan, sitting in its repaired space, dented door and all. She said, "In that?" He said, "That car has never lost anyone who was inside it. I'd like to maintain the record." They left at 9:15. Under the pretense of a dinner meeting, Evelyn logged in her calendar with a fabricated client name. Marcus drove, and she sat in the passenger seat feeling the way a person feels when they have stepped off a ledge and have not yet determined whether it is a curb or a cliff. He said very little. The car felt different from the inside, tighter, more purposeful. The seat adjusted precisely. The mirrors angled with an exactness that suggested the vehicle had been configured for operational use and maintained that configuration for years. He took a route she would not have chosen. Avoiding the main corridors, cutting through residential streets on the edge of DuPont Circle, and she realized he was running a route pattern check, watching for vehicles that matched his turns. "Anyone?" she asked. He said, "One possibility. Silver SUV 2 blocks back. Could be nothing." 2 turns later, he said, "Not nothing." He pressed a control on the center console she had not seen him touch before. From beneath the rear of the car, a thin cloud of vapor released and dispersed across the road surface behind them, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet exhalation of mechanism, and when she turned to look through the rear window, the silver SUV had pulled sharply to the left and stalled. Marcus said, "Oil dispersion. Affects tire traction. They'll be fine in about 10 minutes. She turned back to face forward. She said, "Who are you?" He glanced at her briefly. He said, "Someone who prepared very carefully for a situation I hoped would never arrive." She said, "And now it has." He said, "And now it has." They reached the warehouse unit at 9:50. Marcus pulled in and killed the engine and sat still for 30 seconds in the dark before pressing the door release. Inside, he moved with the efficiency of someone executing a rehearsed sequence to the back of the unit, to a panel behind the corkboard that she had not seen from the window, which opened to reveal a second archive, a hard case, roughly the size of a briefcase, matte black, with a biometric lock. He pressed his right thumb to the reader. The case opened. Inside, nested in custom foam, was a data storage device unlike anything she could purchase commercially, an enclosure the size of a thick paperback book and with a fiber interface and what appeared to be its own independent power cell. He closed the case. He turned to her. He said, "This contains the records of every operation the Meridian Group ran from 1989 through 2011. Names, accounts, communications, evidence of direct involvement in the deaths of 3 federal operatives and 1 foreign national under diplomatic protection." He held her gaze. "Enough to end a significant number of careers and imprison a significant number of people who currently hold positions of authority." She stared at the case in his hands. She said, "Why haven't you released it?" He said, "Because until 6 days ago, I had no one to release it to who couldn't be intercepted or suppressed before it reached the public record." She understood. She said, "You need someone with a platform they can't quietly kill," he said, "or a company with enough public visibility and legal infrastructure to make suppression politically impossible." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I ran into your car." He said, "You did." She said, "That was not an accident." He said, "No. Though the steering hack was theirs, the outcome was mine." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "All right. Tell me what you need." Raymond Cole's betrayal surfaced completely at 11:15 that night when Evelyn, accessing her own company servers remotely with Marcus beside her, found the internal memo he had sent to an encrypted external address at 7 p.m. The same address that connected, through 2 hops, to the Liechtenstein company. The memo described the location of Marcus Webb's warehouse unit. It described the biometric archive. It included, at the bottom, a note that read, "Asset must not leave the building with the case. Neutralize before transport if necessary." She read the word neutralize and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She looked at Marcus. He was already on the phone, speaking in a low voice, in a language she didn't recognize. He ended the call in under a minute. He said, "We need to move now. There's a team already dispatched." Estimated 12 minutes. She said, "Move where?" He said, "My car." What followed felt, to Evelyn Carter, less like a car chase and more like the exposure of a system she had spent her entire career operating inside without understanding. Marcus drove the DB5 because that was what it truly was. Beneath the civilian bodywork and the years of careful disguise, the actual vehicle, retrofitted and maintained with a discipline that matched everything else about him through the sleeping city, with a calmness that bordered on eerie. When the black SUV appeared behind them on Massachusetts Avenue, he touched 3 switches in sequence, and the license plate rotated, presenting a different number to any camera watching from above. When a second vehicle cut across an intersection ahead of them, trying to box the sedan in, he activated a forward-facing system she saw only as a brief lateral flash of light, and the blocking vehicle swerved hard left and stopped against a median barrier. He was not rough. He was not reckless. He was exactly as precise as everything else about him: the folded gloves, the level voice, the 12 years of mopping floors in a building that sat 3 blocks from a federal routing node. She was not afraid. She recognized, distantly, that she should probably be afraid. But what she felt instead was something that had been absent from her life for so long that she had forgotten it had a name. She felt that the thing she was doing mattered. Not the quarterly reports, not the valuations. She was driving through the city in the dark, with a former intelligence operative and a case full of evidence that could dismantle a shadow organization, and it mattered completely, in a way that all the $9 billion mornings had never quite managed. She thought about the first morning, the parking garage, the moment she had looked at him standing beside the crumpled car and seen nothing at all. She thought about how much she had known in that moment, and how confident she had been in all of it, the certainty of it, the sheer, unquestioned weight of being Evelyn Carter, in a world that had always arranged itself around Evelyn Carter's certainty. She understood now that certainty of that kind was not a quality. It was a vulnerability. Marcus had spent 12 years building a cover out of exactly that kind of blindness. The blindness of people who look at a man with a mop and see only the mop. Marcus caught a fragment of a building's edge on the passenger side, a bollard she didn't see in the dark, and the impact was minor. But she heard him exhale sharply, and when she looked over, his left hand had come off the wheel. "Marcus," he said, "I'm fine." He put the hand back. She said, "You are not fine." He said, "I'm functional." "That's sufficient." She kept her eyes on his face for a moment, then on the road ahead, and did not argue because the warehouse district was behind them. Now and ahead were the lights of the federal complex on the east side of the city, and Marcus had told her 20 minutes ago that there was one person there who could receive the case and initiate the process, a federal prosecutor named Hargrove, who had been trying to rebuild this exact case from fragments for 6 years, and who Marcus had contacted, once, through an anonymous channel that he had prepared for this contingency and hoped never to use. They parked on a side street at 2 in the morning. Marcus was pale. He handed her the case. He gave her the name, the office number, the specific phrase she would need to say at the door. She looked at him. She said, "Come with me." He shook his head. He said, "If I walk into that building, I create a jurisdictional problem that buries the case for 2 years. Alone, the case is clean. The chain of custody holds." She sat for a moment with the case on her lap. She said, "I treated you like furniture." He said nothing. She said, "That first day, I talked to you like you were furniture." He looked straight ahead through the windshield at the lights of the federal building. He said, "People often do." She said, "I'm sorry." He turned to look at her, and in the ambient light of the city at 2 in the morning, the expression on his face was neither hard nor forgiving. It was simply present, fully present, the face of someone who had learned to absorb what life brought without requiring it to be different. He said, "Go. Hargrove will be waiting." She got out of the car. She walked toward the building. At the door, she turned once and looked back. The sedan sat at the curb with its engine running. She could see his silhouette behind the wheel, still and patient. She went in. The days that followed were not cinematic. They were long and procedural and punctuated by lawyers. The federal prosecutor, Hargrove, a compact, gray-haired woman, who seemed entirely unsurprised by the arrival of a technology CEO at 2 in the morning, with a classified archive, spent 18 minutes reviewing the case contents, and then made 4 phone calls in rapid succession. By 4 in the morning, a federal seal had been placed on Raymond Cole's office, and his personal files had been placed in custodial hold. By 6, Cole himself had been contacted and asked to present voluntarily for questioning. He did not do so voluntarily. By 8, when Evelyn's executive team arrived at Caldwell Meridian to find federal agents stationed at the 11th floor, the story was already moving through the financial press as an unconfirmed report. By noon, it was confirmed. The arrests came in stages over the following 3 weeks. Raymond Cole first, charged with conspiracy and obstruction, then 6 others connected through the Liechtenstein shell. A retired senior official from a federal agency, a partner at a defense consulting firm, 2 executives at a security contractor, and at the end, a man whose name the public had never heard, but who Marcus, when Evelyn told him, recognized immediately as the person who had signed the order that burned his team 22 years ago and left him 3 colleagues dead and a false name as his only asset. She told him the name in the warehouse unit, which she visited on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks after the night in the car. He was there, his left arm in a support brace from the injury that had turned out to be a fractured radial bone rather than the minor bruise he had insisted it was in the car, cleaning one of the communication devices with a soft cloth. He received the name without visible emotion. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good." Just that word. She had expected more. She had expected relief, or anger, or the visible collapse of something long held tightly. What she got was one word, delivered in the same level tone he used for everything. And somehow, that was the most complete thing she had ever heard anyone say. The public reaction to the release of the Meridian Group archive, portions of which were declassified in coordination with the federal prosecutor's office and released to major news organizations, was massive and sustained. 7 congressional offices opened inquiries. 3 foreign governments requested extradition on related matters. A bipartisan caucus introduced legislation specifically designed to close the oversight gaps the organization had exploited. Evelyn testified before a Senate committee and gave the cleanest, most precise account she was capable of, which was substantially cleaner and more precise than the account she would have given a month earlier, before she had spent a week alongside a man whose entire life was organized around the weight of accuracy. The committee members asked her why she had come forward. She said, "Because someone showed me that the truth costs less than you think and matters more than you've convinced yourself." They wrote that down. Caldwell Meridian Technologies survived. Its stock dropped 8% on the day of the initial news, recovered 5% by week's end, and over the following quarter, actually rose above its pre-event price, driven, analysts noted, by an unusual surge in public goodwill toward the company and its CEO. Evelyn herself was profiled in several major publications. She gave one interview that she considered worth giving to a journalist who asked her not about the case or the stock price or the political fallout, but about the day it had started. The journalist asked, "What did you think when you first saw inside that trunk?" Evelyn said, "I thought I had the wrong information about a lot of things." The journalist asked if she could be more specific. Evelyn thought for a moment and said, "I thought I was a person who understood power. I was correct that I understood one kind of power. I had never considered the other kind." The journalist asked her to define the other kind. She said, "The kind that doesn't need anyone to know about it." She had the parking garage on level 2 renovated. New lighting. A fresh coat of paint on the columns. Better drainage. And in the corner where Marcus Webb's sedan had sat for 12 years, in the spot that had been quietly reserved for the maintenance staff, and quietly occupied by a man who was not merely the maintenance staff, she had a small brass plate mounted on the wall. It said nothing dramatic. Just the model designation of an automobile and a year. DB5, 1960. 4. Below it, in smaller type, reserved. She left the space empty. Marcus came back to the building once, 6 weeks after everything. He appeared in the lobby at noon on a Wednesday, wearing a dark coat she had not seen before, no uniform, no gloves. He asked the front desk to let Evelyn know he was there. She came down herself. They stood in the lobby together, and she asked if he was well, and he said he was improving. She asked where he was going. He said he wasn't certain yet. She said she hoped he would stay somewhere quiet. He said, "Quiet follows me less reliably than I'd like." She laughed a real laugh. Not the dismissive sound she had made in the garage that first morning, but something warmer and less controlled. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that had been stored somewhere for a long time. A smile assembled from the materials of a life that had contained more discipline than softness, and it was better than any expression she had seen on any face in any boardroom. She said, "I owe you more than I know how to calculate." He said, "You drove a very complicated car through a worse situation without any training. That accounts for quite a lot." She said, "I had a good teacher." He said, "You're a fast learner." He turned toward the door. She said, "Marcus." He paused. She said, "Who are you? Really?" He looked back at her with those level, patient eyes, and the lobby was quiet, and the brass elevator doors were shining, and outside the city moved in its ordinary way, indifferent and enormous. He said, "Just someone who keeps things clean." He went through the door. She watched through the glass as he crossed the sidewalk to where the sedan sat at the curb, the dented door still showing the ghost of the impact that had started everything. He got in. The engine turned over. He pulled into traffic without hurry, without drama, and merged into the flow of the city the way a calm person merges into a crowd fully, and without leaving a gap. On the display panel inside the warehouse unit, which Evelyn learned about only from the federal inventory report filed 3 weeks later, there was a small, illuminated screen she had not seen during her visits. The inventory officer noted that it had activated automatically when the vehicle's engine was started that last evening. It showed a short text string in green phosphor characters on a black screen, in a font that matched exactly nothing in the commercial catalog. The kind of font built for a specific purpose by people who expected it to outlast the context in which it was created. 4 words. In a standard authentication format she recognized from the declassified operational documents she had spent the past weeks reading. The inventory officer photographed it, logged it, and noted in parentheses that she did not understand its significance. The screen read, "Welcome back, Agent." Years later, when journalists and academics wrote about the Meridian Group case, they would describe it in the language of systemic failure, institutional oversight gaps, regulatory blind spots, the predictable consequences of privatized intelligence operations, operating without sufficient accountability. They were not wrong. But their accounts consistently missed the human geometry of how it had actually unfolded. They missed the parking garage. They missed the scratch on the Bentley's fender. They missed the fact that the entire architecture of accountability, the arrests, the inquiries, the legislation had hinged on a moment that looked, from every external angle, like a minor traffic incident between a powerful woman and an invisible man. Evelyn thought about this often in the months that followed. She thought about it during her Senate testimony, when the committee chairman thanked her for her courage, and she felt the words sit strangely in the air between them, because courage had not been what she felt in the car that night with Marcus. She had felt something closer to clarity, the specific, almost physical sensation of seeing a situation completely, without the buffer of assumption or hierarchy, or the comfortable insulation of $9 billion of institutional authority. She had been frightened. She had also been, for the first time in a long time, entirely awake. She would not have traded one for the other. The building's maintenance team received a collective bonus that quarter. Evelyn approved it personally and asked HR to ensure it was accompanied by a note, not a corporate communication, not a branded card with the company logo, but a plain handwritten note that said, "Thank you for keeping this place running. It matters more than it looks." The maintenance supervisor, a man named George, who had worked in the building for 20 years, and who had watched the events of that week with the composed attention of someone who had seen most things already, read the note twice, and then folded it and put it in his pocket. He told the story at his retirement party 4 years later. He said it was the most accurate thing anyone with that much money had ever said to him. The data storage device from the DB5 was formally received into federal evidence custody, cataloged, and secured at a facility in Northern Virginia. The chain of custody was clean, exactly as Marcus had intended. The fiber interface yielded everything he had promised it would yield. Operational records in exhaustive detail, financial transfers documented to the cent, communications that read, in the words of one federal prosecutor, like a textbook on how to conduct criminal enterprise at the intersection of government authority and private capital. The prosecutions built from that material were still ongoing 18 months after the initial arrests, branching into jurisdictions across 4 continents. The case had a life of its own now, fed by the archive, growing in directions Marcus himself may not have fully anticipated, or perhaps he had. It was, Evelyn reflected, difficult to be certain about the limits of what he had anticipated. Based on available evidence, the answer was, not many. The last thing she heard from him directly came 3 months after his visit to the lobby. It was a letter, sent through standard post, to her office address, written on plain white paper in a careful, even hand. It did not have a return address. It said, "The car has been placed with a museum archive that maintains working examples of historically significant vehicles. The archivist was given the same instructions I kept for 12 years. Active systems maintained. 70. 2-hour handshake. No public demonstration of operational features." They seemed pleased to have it. I told them it had belonged to someone who had used it well. I thought you would want to know it is in good hands. The letter was signed with a single initial. She read it twice, sitting at her desk in the corner office with the city spread below her window. And then she folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, which she locked. She did not tell anyone about the letter. Some things, she had learned, did not require an audience. She still drove the Bentley. She was still precise about where she parked it. She was still Evelyn Carter. The clarity hadn't softened her. It had only refined her. The way heat refines rather than destroys, and the company was still $9 billion and growing, and the meetings were still long, and the decisions were still difficult, and the world still arranged itself, largely, around the axis of people who had chosen to be powerful and stayed that way. She had not become a different person. She had become a more accurate version of the same person. The difference, she found, was enough. She drove down to parking level 2 one morning, 3 months after the renovation, and sat in the car for a moment in the clean new light before getting out. She looked at the brass plate on the wall. Reserved. She thought about the morning it had started, the sound of the impact, the expression on Marcus's face when he'd walked toward the damage unhurried, unsurprised, fully present. She got out of the Bentley. She walked to the elevator. She went up to her office. She had work to do, and she did it well, and she did not forget. Somewhere in a museum archive in a city she had not been told the name of. An old car sat in a temperature-controlled bay, its systems running their quiet cycles, its license plate dormant in its housing, its display panel dark, until the next 72-hour handshake arrived, and the screen glowed green for 4 seconds, and then went dark again. And on the roads of a country that did not know his name, a man drove a different car now, quieter and more anonymous, watching the mirrors with the practiced calm of someone who has spent a lifetime being careful. He was retired, technically. He was not bored. The world was large, and not all of it was clean, and he had never been able to leave a mess alone for very long. That, perhaps, was the most accurate thing anyone could have said about him. Not the operations, not the archive, not the 22 years of building a silence careful enough to survive. Just that. He had always preferred things clean,